on this. Oh, okay.
Got it.
You have to click accept. All right. So it is Monday, October 23rd, 2023. I'm Susan Creighton, and I'm half of the small business Narratus, which includes me and my colleague here, Pat McPherson. And we are working with the Marlboro Morris Ale Committee to create an archive of the first 50 years and beyond of the Marlboro Morris Ale. And as part of that, we are interviewing a number of people who we feel have an interesting part of the story of the ale to tell. And today we are talking with John Mayberry, our beloved friend and colleague who lives in Toronto, Ontario. John, would you just introduce yourself and say a bit about your connection to Morris dancing?
Do you want me to say my name in case I show up on the recording?
Yes,
this is
thank you.
My voice, Pat McPherson, and I'm going to go get Susan a drink of water. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Okay. That's a big question.
Let's go back to, when did you first start dancing?
Yeah.
How did you stumble onto Morris?
All right. Well, I've told this often enough that there's sort of a well-worn narrative, but I'll try to actually think about it as I tell you about it this time.
Okay.
I grew up in a dancing family. My parents met folk dancing. So the first folk dance, I think they just called it a folk dance, but I understand it was probably what we would now call international folk. And my parents met when my dad was a graduate student. My mom was an au pair, and they met in Princeton, New Jersey, at a folk dance, and they became regulars. And one of my favorite stories my mom and dad told me just not long before my dad died, actually, was that mom had her eye on this cute grad student who had come to the dance with somebody else. Oh. And they regularly went back to somebody's house for beers and a sing afterwards. And my mom was, I think, maybe didn't really know very many people, and was standing by the piano. And my dad spent the evening standing at the other side of the piano. And my parents were telling me this story just a few years ago. My mom was telling me the story. And she said, I didn't know whether he noticed me or not. And my dad burst out, "Why the hell do you think I was standing there all night at the other end of the piano?" Anyway, they on a Tuesday night, they regularly went to Tuesday night dances. They got married. They had me. I was born on a Tuesday, so they missed that night.
But all other Tuesdays.
Well, they wanted to take me when I was a week old, but their pediatrician insisted that they didn't take me out until I was 2 weeks old. But on my 2-week anniversary, I was taken to my first dance.
Wonderful.
In a woven basket, and they parked me in front of the speakers. And somebody else had brought their big German Shepherd, who was also parked in front of the speakers. And apparently the German Shepherd took a shine to me and wouldn't let my parents take me away at the end of the night until the owner of the dog came and got the dog away. So anyway, that's when I first started dancing.
He was guarding you.
Yep.
He knew it was his job.
I don't know if that meant my parents ignored me completely for the whole 2 hours of the dance or what, but anyway, so that's just an illustration of the dancing center of my family. And my parents would have dance parties, like New Year's Eve parties were black tie dance parties at our house. They'd clear all the furniture out. They had a big dining room that cleared the furniture out, and so they had 2 big parties a year, one for their dancing friends on New Year's, and one for their non-dancing friends on Boxing Day or something like that. I can't remember.
Oh, okay.
So and so our record cabinet was full of folk dance music and what we would now call world music, calypso and Israeli tunes and hopbacks and
Beatbox.
and what? Beatbox? Yeah, whatever predated beatbox. So I, from the earliest age, as soon as I was able to put on a record on the turntable myself, it was a regular thing. We didn't have TV until I was 9, I think.
Wow.
But it was a regular thing to spend time in an afternoon or an evening putting a record on and dancing around the house. And one of my favorites was a klezmer record my parents had, which was what was Mickey Katz's orchestra. And later in life, and when I became a theater a professor of teacher and professor of theater technician stuff, I met a fellow named Mike Katz, who had grown up in New York City and was the technical director of the theater at MIT. And he and I became friends. We'd see each other at conferences once a year. And I once said, Katz, the only, that always makes me think of Mickey Katz, who had this klezmer band. And he said, oh, that's my uncle.
Oh my goodness.
And Mickey Katz was Joel Gray's dad. Joel Gray's
wow, the Joel Gray.
The Joel Gray.
Oh
who
my
was
goodness.
Of my friend Mike Katz. Anyway, so
there's no such thing as 7 degrees of separation. It's 3.
I don't know if you just for your interest, I once read an article in the New Yorker about the fellow who did the study that resulted in the idea that 6 degrees of separation is the longest away anyone is from anyone else.
Wow.
And they did that study by if I remember right, they went to a small town in the Midwest somewhere, and they gave a bunch of people, some number of people, I don't know, 100 people or whatever, an envelope, and it had the name of a New York lawyer on it. And they said, give this envelope to someone you know who you think is most likely to know somebody who knows somebody, etc., to get it to that lawyer. And most of them got there within 3.
Oh my.
But the longest journey any of those envelopes made was 6. So 6 was, and then the interesting thing also, so we all think of 6 degrees as being the thing, but that's the maximum.
Wow.
It's usually much less. And they almost always go through certain people that I forget what he called them, like nodes or something like that. And those people are the people in the community or the communities who have their fingers in the most pies. So it was I think almost everybody gave it to Muriel Livingstone, who was not only the wife of the hardware store owner, but president of the PTA, active in the church, and had a daughter who'd been in the hospital, or something like that. So the 6 degrees of separation is much more rich than we usually think of. Anyway,
right.
But
let me ask. You said your parents met in Princeton?
Yep.
And is that where most of your growing up was then?
No, that's where I was born.
You headed to Virginia, right?
Well, we lived until I was 3. We lived in, I don't remember them very well, but then we lived in Levittown, Pennsylvania, and Moorestown, New Jersey.
That sounds right.
As well as Princeton. And then when I was 3, my dad got a job with the U.S. Air Force, and we moved to Tokyo. and lived in Tokyo till I was 6. And I was Japanese and you know, a typical immigrant child that had to translate for my parents and help my dad on the train and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
So you were
And
picking up Japanese
oh,
language.
I was the only people I spoke English with was my parents. And
Oh,
so my mom was originally from Sweden. And until I was 3, as I understand it, they spoke Swedish with me at home. But so Swedish was my first language.
yeah.
Um, and then Japanese was and English were my second and third. And yeah, so when Lori and I went to Japan in April,
Did it all come back?
it
Or
was
come?
I mean, I had this idea that I would get my Japanese back before we went, but of course I didn't. But it was so soul soothing for me to be there, and just all these familiar
Yeah.
smells and sounds and ways of being, and
Right. And
I
your ear was attuned to hearing the language. I
yeah,
would think maybe even if your speaking didn't come back all the way, that your listening
yeah.
and comprehension might have been
Well,
real.
what I found myself sort of flippantly saying to people when I got back is I discovered I still speak Japanese. I just have no vocabulary. So, you know, if I within a few days, if I looked up the word for today and the word for hot and the word for, you know, weather, what I could say it and I could sound Japanese.
Wow.
Say it.
I don't remember it now, but you know,
Oh.
Yeah.
but I, you know, I had this little phrase of, you know what, I can't. It's been months since I trotted it out, but I had a little phrase I would say, "I'm sorry, I used to speak Japanese when I was little, but now I've forgotten it." But
Yeah.
you know, people say, how, you know, how nice," and I also was reminded of my dad's. My dad would often. I remember my dad saying that because he was a polyglot, like he could learn a language in one of his one of the last things he was working on as he just before he died, as he was succumbing to Alzheimer's, was he was trying to get his Hungarian back because he had learned
Oh.
Hungarian as a teenager
Yeah.
and you know just wanted to get it back. But anyway, my dad would tell this story of being in Japan and working on Japanese. And little sidebar, when we went back, I took the pocket dictionary that my dad had carried the whole time he lived in Japan, and you know, completely thumb worn, and almost every word in it underlined, as in he knew that word now,
Oh my.
and corrections, and you know, amendations, like no, nope, you don't say this for, you don't use this for this group for pencils, even though you use it for most long skinny things, you know,
Interesting.
things like
Yeah.
anyway. My dad would say that he'd like stop somebody on the street and would say, you know, excuse me, can you tell me how to get to the Shinto shrine? And they would say, oh, you speak Japanese very well for a foreigner. It's amazing that you've learned so much. I didn't quite understand what you were saying. and
But we
and
appreciate the effort.
well, I used to tell that as a, you know, a sort of a story on its own. And then I realized when we were there that so many foreigners speak Japanese with a thick English accent or a foreign accent, whereas my dad and I are good mimics. So our Japanese sounded like Japanese, even if we made mistakes in the vocabulary or in the grammar. And I think that's what they were picking up on, saying, "Whoa, your
Yeah.
Japanese is very good. I just don't know what you're saying."
It's
It
okay.
wasn't that they were being um, uh, um, unreasonably polite. They were actually expressing something. Anyway, so yeah, so we lived in Japan till I was 6. And we moved back to the outskirts of Washington, D.C., Fairfax, Virginia, or Falls Church, Virginia. And then I started coming to boarding school in Toronto, the school my dad had gone to when I was 12. mostly because my parents had gotten in the habit of thinking this is what was going to happen when they thought they would be posted somewhere, around the world. And so that it wasn't, by the time we lived in Washington, it wasn't a given that I would go to this school, but they looked around at other schools and decided yes. And my grandparents lived nearby in Bowmanville, Ontario. And so I actually have lived in Toronto since I was 12, since 1967.
Right.
And then my family moved up about an hour and a half away from Toronto in 1971. So that's when I became a Canadian citizen some not very many years ago. Anyway,
A few years ago. Ah.
Yeah, I just was too busy, and I thought, what difference would it make? The only difference was that I couldn't vote in Canada.
Right.
And
right.
as I got older, that became more important. And so it was effortless for me because I was over 55, and I think over 55 you don't have to take the citizenship test.
Nice.
So, I went to this big room with 150 people in it, and they said, all right, we're going to check everybody's documents. And once we've checked everybody's documents, then we'll hand out the papers and everybody write the test, who's the first prime minister, how many provinces are there, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I was called as the second. They said, so that's probably going to be an hour or so to go through all the documents. So you just have to be patient and wait. So I was the second person called up. I showed my documents. I chatted with the woman whose daughter was thinking of going to York University. And I said, well, our program is great, and then she said, okay, now sit back down and you'll just have to wait. And I said, do I have to wait if I'm over 55? And she looked at my age on the document. She said, oh, no, you can go. So I just
Wonderful.
looked at these 150 people who were going to have to wait for another hour, and I just walked out. Anyway, then went to this ceremony, and I was unprepared for how moved I was by the ceremony. I thought of, and then I thought of a friend of mine in high school who was adopted, and I remember one day saying, so Tim, what's it like to be adopted? I said, well, my whole life, my parents have told me that most people are born at random into their family, but we chose you. And I felt that way about my citizenship. Yeah.
Yeah. You chose Canada.
Yep.
Or Canada chose you. Yeah.
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 Anyway, so that's how I started dancing.
Interesting.
But then
so how did you stumble on Morris? Because it sounds like you hadn't seen this at all yet. You're in boarding school.
When I went off to university, and I don't know that I did this consciously, but in retrospect, I was looking for my kind of dance, and I danced every Thursday night at the Victoria College pub, and
Victoria College.
Yeah, and you must know the pub in Wimelwood. No,
I was a non-drinker.
Yeah,
I wasn't really a joiner.
Mm-hmm.
It was possible to go to the pub and not drink, but it was certainly a beer fest. But I danced. I had my dance buddies, these gals who I was very fond of, several of whom had boyfriends who didn't dance, and I just dance until closing. I would often, me and I and one of the other my dance friends would often be the last ones on the dance floor, and at 1:30 or whatever time they closed, but I
talking about rock and roll dancing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was always Layla was always the last song, or Stairway to Heaven, or
Right.
Mm-hmm.
sometimes there were live bands, but I remember looking for my kind of dance I'd done classical ballet when I was 10. I did classes in that. And I often say that I think my mom would have been the happiest if I'd ended up as a classical dancer. But this is in, little Maisie Lee's Sunshine Dance Studio in a little shopping center in Annandale, Virginia.
Right.
And I think first it was a Parks and Rec thing. There was me and 2 other boys, and there was this introductory ballet for boys, and I loved it. I mostly loved the shoes, and I loved that I was told when I got my first pair of ballet flats that you have to sew your own elastics on, and I knew how to sew, and but I loved that. And then when that introductory class finished, I guess my mom looked around and found another class at Susie Snowflake's School of Dance.
Right.
I was put in a class with like 14 girls, all of whom were aged sort of 7 to 13, and all of whom had been dancing since they were in the womb. And there's me, this 10-year-old boy with boy in the class, and it didn't take. And so I stopped that. But I remember at university going to international folk dance things, and I went to Renaissance dance stuff.
Yeah.
And with the Society for Creative Anachronism folks, and none of it really grabbed me. But then my high school buddy Jamie Beaton, who went to the same university I did, he and I hatched this plan. I think the deal was that the year after, I think what happened was we realized that the university year in Canada is shorter than most US universities. So we last class is usually first week of April, and last exam is first week of May.
Oh my. Okay.
So we would have a whack of time before our summer jobs started. And so we decided we were going to go to the UK. And I'd never been. He'd been with his parents. And so we hatched this plan. And we had started going to, in high school, we'd started going to Fiddler's Green Folk Club.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Which was this little British style folk club run by
That's where I went.
Strickland and Tam Kearney and by Margot and Grit Laskin, and it was a classic English style folk club. They had 2 shows a week, Tuesday night and Sunday night, and it was small. It was in this little old house, about 40 people at the most, and we saw amazing folks, and because of that, so we actually went to somebody, probably Alistair Brown, who was also involved there, or Tam, and we said, we're going to England, we're going to the UK, how do we find folk music? And they said, you want to go to Cecil Sharp House, because this is of course before the internet and before anything like that. So we sidebar, the way we prepared for the trip was we went to our parents and said, who do you know that we might be able to stay with? And both our parents, Jamie's mostly because his mom's family was from Sussex, and she still had a great uncle in Hastings who had been the mayor of Hastings, and he still had and his dad's relatives in Scotland outside Glasgow, and my parents, who had been heavily involved in the diplomatic black tie world when they lived in Tokyo and Washington, they had friends who were I don't think they had anybody who was an ambassador, but people who became ambassadors later, who were cultural attachés and things all over the place. And so we spent months writing letters to friends of our parents saying, "Hi, my name's John Mayberry. I'm the son of Jim and Shurston Mayberry, and my buddy Jamie and I are doing a tour of England in April, May, and wonder if it might be possible to come by and say hello, and if we'll have sleeping bags, if we could stay on the floor." I don't remember exactly. And we got responses from almost all of them.
Oh, nice.
And saying, of course, or saying, "Sorry, we'll be in Tunisia," or whatever.
Like you do.
Yeah. Right.
So we plotted, we circled on a map all these places, and then our first day there, and we gave them sort of a range of time we would be there, and we got off the plane, we're jet lagged, we went to Hyde Park, I think, in London, and slept on the grass under a tree for a few hours, and then got ourselves to Cecil Sharp House and got all the brochures, the flyers, and for all the folk festivals and folk clubs that were happening while we were there, and circled those on a map too, and then plotted a route. And we started in London, went west to the West Country, and then went up through the Lake Wales, the Lake Country, and up to Scotland, and over to Islay, where Jamie's dad's family was originally from, and then back down and through Norwich, and had amazing adventure, hitchhiking almost all the way.
Oh, wow.
And at 2, if not more, of the folk festivals we were at, we went to the Newton Abbot Folk Festival, and we saw the festival was rained out. It was on the grounds of a small racetrack, and it was rained out completely. And so we were in a group of about 10 people who saw the Copper family.
Oh,
wow.
Some other. Oh, Jamie's the archivist of the pair, so he remembers names and dates and things. But we saw amazing bands in this little room, and also some Morris dancing. And I don't know that we'd ever heard of it, but it just tickled us. And I remember we had all these games we would play, because we were in no rush to get anywhere. So we were fine standing by the side of the road for hours and hours waiting for a ride, and sometimes in the rain. And we discovered that we traveled really well together, because when one of us was really bummed, the other one would come up with something to kind of lighten things up.
Nice.
And we would kind of take turns doing that. But I remember standing, I think we were where I think we were outside Chipping Norton, and there was a field of grass, and we were waiting for a ride, and I remember we grabbed tufts of grass, and
oh,
Hank, we were
sweet.
dancing by the side of the road, just kind of making it up, and just thinking that was so much fun. And so that was 1973. And yeah, the exact chronology of all that is fuzzy, but we came back to Toronto, and I think it was within, and this could be looked up, within a year or so, Tony Barron brought up a team that included it included some of the early Morris guys. I don't think Dexter was in there, but Hank, I'm pretty sure Hank Chapin was there. And anyway, Tony brought up, because he and John were singing at Mariposa, and they brought up a team from the Marlboro guys, and we saw Morris dancing in our city, and whoa, this was just great. And then And then 1976, when I graduated from university, I worked for half a year, saved up enough money for a ticket to London, and with no return ticket. I think I had a return ticket that had to be used within a year, and it was hardly any more than a one-way ticket. So I thought I'll go and stay as long as I want. I went to London and Paris and went through Germany and Denmark and the Netherlands, and wound my way up to Sweden, when I think I met my mom there at my grandparents' for my grandmother's 70th birthday, I think, maybe. Anyway, and then I just stayed in Sweden, and Jamie had also gone. He went on a shorter trip, but he went back to go to teachers college. And I remember that winter, no, maybe it was the fall, anyway, getting postcards from Jamie saying that 2 people had moved to Toronto. This is Bob Mumford and Christine, I forget her name, and they had both danced on some teams. Bob had been on the New Cambridge Men.
Yes, right.
And he had moved to Toronto. And this Christine, whose last name I can't remember, she was from somewhere. And so all of a sudden there were some people who could teach Morris, and it was happening. And it happened on Sunday afternoons at the Fiddler, the same place at Fiddler's Green, the little old house on Eglinton. And I remember I was so jealous, because there I was, sort of spinning my wheels. I had no idea what I was doing. I think I had a Swedish girlfriend, and I thought, well, maybe should I stay here? But what would I do? And I was living frugally. I lived at my grandparents'. They were driven crazy by this 20-something who had no idea what he was going to do. I thought, well, maybe I'll go to mime school in Paris, because when I'd been in Paris, I'd found, again, this is before the internet, so I'd read an article about Lecoq's mime school, clown school in Paris, and so this was in August 73. I found the school. I went in and I talked to, I think it was his wife, who told me that, because I'd lived in Paris, I was playing Irish music on the subways, and I asked about how you went to school, and my mom had said, with a sort of a parent's eye that I recognize now, but I didn't at the time. She said, I've got some money saved up. I could help you with your tuition if you wanted to go somewhere. And so I thought, well, maybe I could go to Lecoq's, but I found out that they'd already accepted their class for that year, of course, in August. The auditions are probably in January or something. But they said, keep in touch and try again. And we'll consider you for next year. So that was sort of my plan. So I was in Sweden, and I got these letters from Jamie saying this Morris dancing was happening, and I wrote back and said, oh, I'm so jealous. And he wrote back and said, don't be jealous. You're living in Sweden. You're doing all this cool stuff. And I was like, yeah, it doesn't seem that cool from here. But and then I went back to Paris. Yeah, that was when I was playing Irish music. I met up with 2 English guys, one who played tin whistle, one who played fiddle, and I played sort of hacky mandolin, but I was the only one who spoke French of the 3 of us, so I made myself valuable in the trio, and we would hop on and in my 20-something-year-old brain, I thought we invented the idea of hopping on and off the trains and playing on the trains, which in retrospect seems unlikely, but we certainly didn't see anybody else doing it. And you know, so I would sort of sweet talk people while my buddies Joe and Will were playing, and we were making enough to live on, because we'd met these young French guys who were big folk music supporters, also minor drug dealers, but and they had they came from a rich,
Minor.
well, I remember going to their apartment one time, and
John,
there was a
forgive me.
Yeah,
I'm going to have to fast forward you a little bit.
of course. But you know, just so I came back, and Jamie was busy Morris dancing, and so I started Morris dancing when I came back just for Christmas, because I had enough money to stay. But I thought, oh, I'll surprise my folks. I came back, surprised them on I think maybe even the day before Christmas, showed up at their door saying, hi, I'm home. But I thought I was just home to sell the rest of my stuff and go back to Paris.
Oh.
But Morris dancing caught me, and I then started seeing somebody in the group, and ended up living with her for a while, and sort of then through Morris, I got involved with David Perry and the PLS, the Medieval Renaissance group, and thought, well, maybe I'm going to be an actor. And so I auditioned for things, and and Jamie and I had done clowning. We started as jugglers in high school, and had these two clown characters, Rasbo and Orpy, and we did some, you know, kids parties and adult parties and things. And
had either of you studied theater in university?
No, I again, my mom would have loved me to be involved with the theater when I was in high school, but I was little and shy, and well, I don't know about shy, but yeah. And anyway, so I got involved in the Morris and the PLS, and I had a sweetie, and just thought, okay, I'll stay here and try to make this work. And I had done, that. So then I just started Morris dancing twice a week.
Wow.
And
so now, was this
Fiddle Morris,
Green Fiddle your first team?
Yep.
Okay. And so what did Green Fiddle grow out of this class that was sort of learning to Morris dance together, or did it develop separate?
They almost immediately formed a group. In fact, they were invited to Marlboro in 1977. When
I think so. We've got some photos of them from way back.
Practicing for like 3 months.
Wow.
And went with, you know, one dance, and it was from the very beginning, it was a joint side, a men's side and women's side. And
they didn't let
what?
Yeah, they did.
They allowed mixed sides.
You had to dance in separate sides. You could dance as a men's side, and your women's side could dance, but you couldn't dance in the same side.
Okay.
And then the second year, so I think this is 70. So I'm pretty sure it was 77. They went, and I wasn't there. And I think the second year I had a gig. I was doing stage fighting with a buddy, and we did a stage fighting demo at some festival on the island, and I had committed to that. And so I didn't go to Marlboro. So I didn't go until the third time Green Fiddle went, I think, which was probably 79. I don't know. The years all are a jumble back then. And then I danced with Green Fiddle, and there were several other groups. So it was a fractious. There were strong personalities that didn't have the same goals,
right,
in the original group. And first, a women's group broke away, and that was Black Sheep Morris. And then the Hogtown Men broke away about the time when Green Fiddle started dancing more as a mixed side, because enough of the women had left to form Black Sheep that the women couldn't dance. They didn't have numbers to dance, so men would dance in with them. And yeah, and then Hogtown split off, and it was around then that I decided that I had been always really glad to go on Monday nights to Green Fiddle practice and be told what to do. And because as a freelance theater person, most of my life was spent me figuring out what to do, and figuring out, like, planning things and organizing myself, and I just loved being a foot soldier.
Right.
As the team started to divide, I realized that there were things that were important to me about a Morris side, but I had never done anything to voice that view or to try to drive things or organize things or arrange things. So I ran for squire and became squire, and I was squire for I think just a year. I think they change squire every year. I can't remember.
And this is Squire of Green Fiddle.
Yeah.
You didn't follow the Hogtown.
No, because I thought, I had never done anything to try to make things the way I wanted it to be.
Right.
So,
okay.
And then I realized after being squire that it was not a squire-led operation. It was a strong personality-led operation. And so then a number of things happened to Green Fiddle had been a very much a team of couples. And so a number of people had not joined Hogtown because they were coupled with somebody else on the women's side. All of a sudden, that changed with people splitting up, or somebody's partner not dancing anymore, or somebody not sharing a house with somebody who was on the team. And so it was and Hogtown disbanded because they'd lost critical mass, the people had moved away. And so we had it was after a Toronto Ale I think this was in 85, maybe something like that. We decided to have a meeting of men Morris dancers, and it was sort of by mutual invitation, and there were something like 8 or 9 of us, and we met at Jamie Beaton's house, and we realized that we all wanted the same kind of team. And at the end of the meeting, we said, "So are we a team?" And we said, "Yes." And we actually had somebody contacted me for Morris dancing at I think it was a food store opening event, an English food store opening. And I gave the gig to this newly formed team. We didn't even have a name yet, and we didn't have a kit. And we did this gig and made $100, and had got another gig within a couple of weeks. So even before we formed, we had several $100 in the bank. And one of the things we did, we then had a meeting where we decided we were going to actually decide on the rules of the team, like what. And most of us had come from this touchy-feely consensual team, Green Fiddle, that just was so hard to organize and so hard to drive. And so we just all said, let's have a team where the squire decides everything.
Ah,
And
the birth of the Toronto Morris Men administrative structure. Yes.
And it sort of went back to that same idea that I had gone into Morris with. I liked having somebody else decide, as long as it was somebody else deciding the things that I liked them to decide, you know.
Right, right,
But so Jamie,
benevolent dictator.
right.
yeah, benevolent dictator, and Jamie was the first squire, and I was the first bag, and
Great.
and we had no other officers, no kit manager, no beverages manager, no foreman, no tour leader, no anything, just yeah, and we, it so happened that we were going to have this formative meeting at Jim Strickland's house, and Rick Avery, who was one of the original,
Oh yeah,
his sister-in-law was doing her PhD in folklore, something or other, and her thesis was on Morris in Canada. And she asked if she could come and observe and record our formative meeting.
wow.
So she recorded it, transcribed it. So we have a transcription of our founding meeting, which is sort of like the Book of Mormon for, you know.
That's right, right.
And
Just as an aside, does TFMM have its own little informal archival collection? Is there anybody who's kept all this stuff?
that's me. Yep, that's
You.
me.
Okay.
Yeah, I've kept.
Talk later.
I've kept. You know, I kept the letter that I wrote on behalf of the I think 9 men who left Green Fiddle at the same moment. I have the letter describing our, you know, our feelings and why we were doing it, and I have one of those letters that was sent back to us by one of the women on the team saying, "Good for you guys, it's about time."
Great.
We
Wow.
have there are other accounts of people who stayed with Green Fiddle, who in no uncertain terms told us that our crest should be 7 men pissing on a green fiddle. But
No hard feelings though.
no hard feelings, though. Yeah,
Oh my goodness.
but anyway, so we founded the team, and even the name of the team, Jamie decided on the name. I mean, what he quickly established the model that, yes, Squire makes all decisions, but they're only going to work if they're the decisions that the men would want to have made. So
Right.
he would always, you know, consult with everybody, take into account the different, you know. So there were months where he was asking people to suggest team names, and you know, we went through the typical ones, the stupid puns, you know, 6 feet under or 12 feet under, or you know, or Saxon violets, or you know, things, or you know, taking some little known geographical part of Toronto like Tattle Creek and making the Tattle Creek Morris. And then Jamie said, he was, you know, looked at English teams, like it's the, you know, the Chipping Camden Morris men, or the Chipping Camden team, or the, you know, the anyway. So he said, we're going to call ourselves the Toronto Morris Men. And the only objection some of us had was, does that seem a little arrogant that we're not the only or the first? And we thought, well, the only reason the other teams don't call themselves the Toronto whatever is because they didn't think of it, didn't want to, you know. So, and there's a famous team story of the first. It like all good stories, it's got several different versions, but the version that I know is true because I was there is we were at an ale and Rosie Donovan was there, and somebody said, on seeing us for the first time, coming into the ale in the first night, saying, I hear you have a new team and you call it the Toronto Morris Men. That's pretty boring. And Rosie Donovan said, I think it's great. The Toronto fucking Morris Men.
Oh, that started with Rosie.
Started with Rosie.
Wonderful.
And we thought, that's
we go.
That name. And so that's when we became the Toronto F. Morris Men. Rosie. And yeah, I mean the problem with that word in English is it's an intensifier and a description of sexual intercourse, and the two meanings get conflated. And
yes.
So in recent years, there's a strong sense on the team that we've outgrown the F, and some people say, yeah, it always has bothered me, and other people saying, get over it. That's like it's not. I mean, the part of the problem is that we're all old bearded white guys, and that can be creepy to invoke predatory behavior, which is some of the thing that some people go to when they hear that name. And so
right,
yeah, and then there are others of us who are I'm ambivalent. I like whatever the squire decides is fine.
Right.
But yeah, there was a big move when one of our recent squires refused to put the F in anything. But anyway, so that's how I started. And so I was bag for the first 3 years, because we also one of our first rules was that we realized that if somebody's actually going to do any leading, you need more than a year. So we said that but we also didn't want to be one of those teams where a squire just stayed on and on and on and on.
Yeah. Right.
Because that's a lot of work and a lot of trouble. And we'd seen, staleness come out of that too on other teams. Anyway, so our rule is squire is for 2 years.
Okay.
With an optional third. And the option has to be on both sides.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And that's worked really well.
Yeah.
It means that we had at one point we've had some squires that have been more successful in the role than others. But one thing it's meant is almost everybody on the team has been squire, and so almost everybody on the team can identify with that frustration of sending out a question to 27 people and having 3 people respond.
I was going to say, I'm sure that probably changed the way people interact with the squire to be a little more cooperative and communicative, because you've had to be in that position.
That's the theory.
That's right.
There's some people who, despite the great goodwill of the team, have not been able to function well as a squire. Just don't have the organizational chops or the bandwidth for dealing with other people empathetically or whatever. And so almost all our squires have been squire for 3 years. We've had only one or two that been, I forget how long Robin was a squire during the pandemic, and that was
right.
really hard. It almost broke him.
Yeah. It's a tough time to be doing it.
He stepped away from the team for forever, but he's a granddad, and
right. At least for now.
Yeah, but so that's work. But so I was bag for 3 years, and then I was the second squire
Okay.
from 88 to 91. And in there, like I had often thought, looking at the role of the fool and seeing fools on other teams, and that with my clowning background and performance chops um and my, I don't know, like a really deep sense of dance.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Had
and
anyone done any fooling on the team prior to this point?
Jamie had done a little bit of fooling with Green Fiddle,
Okay.
and I remember Margot made him a smock as a traditional,
Yeah.
like you know, Roger Sunderland. I always forget which name is his.
I've heard his name.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a classic fool who only died.
Yeah.
Right.
Um, but he wore a smock in the classic.
Yeah.
That's a
Other-
remarkable piece.
Right.
But I don't remember him doing more than a dance out or two.
Okay.
And yeah, but I thought this is something I should try.
Right.
But
How much
again,
of fooling had you seen? How did you have any kind of mental image for this in your head from seeing anything in England, or was this kind of a making it up as I go along kind of
seen
situation?
it, I'd seen some in England, a fool with a bladder, and of course this is before YouTube and
Mhm.
and um, Peter Redgate had been a Morris dancer in his youth with the Beaux of London City.
Ah.
When he and his wife emigrated to Canada when they were very young, he used to tell the story that he would miss there were some things about England that he would miss. One was his motorcycle, and one was Morris dancing. I forget if there was a third. There's usually a third in those stories, but anyway. And so he got himself a new motorcycle when he came to Canada, but thought, yep, that's it for Morris. And when he would go back, he and his his good old friend Jeff. Oh my gosh, I have a picture of him up on my wall. Jeff Parker and his wife Sheila Parker. They would um, uh, Peter and his wife would stay with them, and Jeff would say, why don't you come out to practice, or they do a few steps in the basement, but it's not the same when you're not
That's,
on a team.
yeah.
And so then one year, so this was before Hogtown, this was when Green Fiddle, still when before there were the splits from Green Fiddle,
Mhm.
we won Toronto Ale. We danced at King's College Circle at the university,
Mhm.
and a photo appeared in the paper, I think, and it just said, Morris dancers dancing Labor Day weekend, and there was a picture of Roger Hansel, and it said Roger, who is a professor in the chemistry department at University of Toronto. And Peter saw this and contacted the chemistry department, found Roger, and walked into a Green Fiddle practice, and it was like being given his life back.
Wow.
Wow.
And he was a source of original Morris lore, and was older than a lot of us.
Right.
He became central to Green Fiddle. He also joined Hogtown
Mm.
as
Mhm.
but didn't leave Green Fiddle to join Hogtown. I think, and then his marriage broke up, and he took up with Margot, whose marriage broke up, and they were a couple, a Central Morris couple until, well, forever, until he died. But yeah, forget where I was going with that. But
So this is how you're getting into fooling. Yeah. So you're
but Jeff Parker. So yeah, so it was not long after that Green Fiddle invited the Bows of London City to come to Toronto.
Oh, great.
And we put them up, and they were a bit older. They had families, and we were mostly young and unattached. And we didn't have big houses to put them up in, but it all went fine. And we made some good friends. Laura and I are still in touch with Marco and Diane Piplica, who
Wow.
Sheffield, I think, in the north, anyway, who stayed with us, I think. And we went back. And then Green Fiddle went to England and danced with the Bows in London. And Jeff was a fool in a very classic, what I think of as a classic English fool. He was a lovely dancer, like one of the best dancers on the side. And their kit was multicolored Forest of Dean, jackets with all the ribbons on them, and his was just black and white. So he was like a black and white photo of the regular team kit, and he had a bladder on a stick, and so that was, I hadn't seen a lot of other fooling other than him and some other teams in England. But when the Toronto Morris Men started, I thought, I could see maybe trying to fool, but as bag and as squire, I couldn't do it, because unlike, because I saw the fool as more of a disruptor, and I felt I couldn't disrupt myself. I've since changed that opinion, but that was how I thought at the time. So it wasn't until 91, 92 after I was squire from 88 to 91.